In 1978, on a quiet roadside in Ireland, Robert Shaw brought his car to a stop, stepped out, and collapsed. He was 51 years old. The moment felt sudden, almost unreal. But what came after revealed a much longer story. The autopsy painted a grim picture. Years of heavy drinking had taken their toll, weakening his body from the inside out. Shaw's death was not an isolated tragedy. It was the first chapter in a darker pattern that would cling to the cast of Jaws long after the film cemented their fame. One actor would later struggle for months, slowly suffocating as his own breath betrayed him. Another would reportedly murmur, "Shark's back," in his final moments. A third left behind a note after collapsing without warning, writing, "The shark got me after all." The film that turned them into icons seemed to linger like a shadow, refusing to let go even after the cameras stopped rolling. Robert Shaw's most famous scene, the USS Indianapolis monologue, did not begin as the controlled, haunting performance audiences now remember. Its origins were unstable. On the first day, scheduled to shoot the speech, Shaw arrived visibly impaired. By some accounts, he had emptied 2 bottles of vodka the night before. He insisted on playing Quint drunk, believing it would add authenticity. Steven Spielberg allowed him to try. What followed was chaos. Shaw was so intoxicated that crew members had to help him onto the boat and into his chair. Lines dissolved mid-sentence. Timing fell apart. The emotional weight was there, but the precision was gone. After repeated failed takes, Spielberg made the call to shut the production down for the day. The next morning rewrote everything. Shaw returned sober. He apologized quietly. He sat down and began again. This time, the delivery was razor-sharp, measured, restrained, and chilling. The set fell silent as he spoke. Within a handful of takes, he delivered the version that would become legendary. It felt effortless on screen, but the reality behind it was fragile, balanced on the thin edge between self-destruction and discipline. That same tension followed Shaw after Jaws. Friends later said he worried about being trapped inside Quint, the hard-drinking, doomed hunter whose life seemed to mirror his own too closely. He took pride in the performance, yet it unsettled him. That is the cost audiences never see. A role can bring success and still leave wounds with no visible scars. On August 28, 1978, the story ended abruptly. Shaw was driving through County Mayo with his wife, Virginia, and their 20-month-old son, Thomas, near Tourmaketti. He had just finished work on his final film, Avalanche Express. Midway through an otherwise ordinary drive, he suddenly gasped for air, pulled over, and stepped out of the car. He collapsed by the roadside before he could make it back to their cottage. Virginia ran for help. An ambulance arrived roughly 15 minutes later. It was too late. Shaw was pronounced dead on arrival at Castlebar General Hospital. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered near the cottage. The shock came from how quickly it all seemed to happen. But the damage had been accumulating quietly for years. The autopsy that followed was unforgiving. Doctors identified alcoholic cardiomyopathy, a condition where prolonged heavy drinking weakens the heart until it can no longer sustain the body. Reports that circulated afterward were stark. Claims that his heart had enlarged to several times its normal size, and that his daily alcohol intake could reach 2 bottles of vodka. Even the jokes Shaw once made about pain could not mask what was happening. When the body sends warnings, denial can sound clever for a while. Eventually, it stops being amusing. And Shaw was not alone. Roy Scheider carried his own battle, mostly unseen. In December 2004, he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a cancer of the blood that attacks plasma cells in the bone marrow. It is the kind of disease that can remain hidden while life appears normal on the surface, revealing itself only through symptoms that feel disconnected, dizziness, headaches, bleeding gums. Then the tests return, and suddenly everything is measured in treatment schedules and survival rates. Scheider kept his diagnosis private. Even many close to him did not know the full extent of it. In June 2005, he underwent a stem cell transplant at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan using his own harvested cells. The chemotherapy was brutal. It left him drained, physically diminished, and exhausted. Still, he continued working. He continued showing up. He spoke publicly about his survival on the Today Show, calling each new day a miracle. When you live inside a diagnosis like that, ordinary mornings stop feeling guaranteed. But cancer does not fight cleanly, and hospitals carry their own risks. In 2007, while receiving treatment at the Myeloma Institute for Research and Therapy in Little Rock, Arkansas, Scheider developed a staph infection introduced through hospital tubing. A staph infection can escalate quickly. Once it enters the bloodstream, it can trigger sepsis, full system collapse. Scheider remained hospitalized for an extended period. Reports say doctors turned to experimental drugs when standard antibiotics failed. During that time, he flatlined twice, surviving the major illness only to be dragged under by something microscopic and unseen, is one of medicine's cruelest ironies. Near the end, the details people recall are relentless. Blood drawn every single day. A body pushed to its limits. The shark, it seemed, never truly left the water. The body failing in slow motion. Doctors would later claim that as much as 80% of his plasma cells were no longer functioning, a sign that the bone marrow itself was giving way. And then there is the line people still repeat, the one he is said to have whispered near the end, half joking, half grieving. Brody should have won against that shark too. It sounds like dialogue lifted from a script, but it also sounds like a man reaching for something familiar as everything else slips out of reach. After his death, the struggle did not end. It moved into a courtroom. Scheider's estate filed a lawsuit against his doctors, alleging that critical medical issues were overlooked, including problems involving his aorta. The case was eventually settled for more than $9 million. Even after the credits roll, some battles continue, just in quieter rooms with different stakes. Then there was Murray Hamilton. On screen, he was the smiling mayor, the embodiment of denial wrapped in charm. Off-screen, his life was moving toward an ending he could not negotiate. In 1986, he filmed his final episodes of The Golden Girls while battling advanced lung cancer. People on set later said he was so ill he would cough up blood between takes, then step back into frame and deliver his lines with composure. He looked thinner. He looked exhausted. But he stayed professional because working was what he knew how to do. Hamilton was 63, and the disease had been wearing him down for months. The history was no secret. Reports describe him as a lifelong chain smoker, up to 3 packs a day for more than 40 years. Doctors told him the tumors matched the kind of damage heavy smoking causes. And yet he continued. Addiction does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it looks like a man lighting another cigarette even after the diagnosis has been spoken out loud. Murray Hamilton died on September 1, 1986, in Washington, North Carolina, still just 63 years old. Some accounts say he died mid-sentence while discussing a possible cameo in Jaws 3. Others claim he turned down chemotherapy because he wanted to keep working, even hiding oxygen tubes beneath costumes during his final roles. There's also a haunting detail that often surfaces, that his body had become so emaciated he weighed around 90 pounds. Whether every retelling aligns perfectly or not, the truth underneath is clear. He worked until he could not. He held on until his body refused. And then there is one of the most emotionally devastating moments in Jaws, the mother on the dock. Lee Fierro played Mrs. Kintner. In that scene, she confronts Chief Brody, her voice cracking as she slaps him across the face. The story behind it has become legend. Those slaps were not staged. They were real. The number people repeat is 17. Scheider took every one. Fierro used a loose wrist technique she had learned in acting training, but even then, pain is pain. The moment cuts so deeply because she was not performing grief as an idea. She was drawing from something real. Years earlier, she had lost her own son. That is why the scene feels like it tears straight through the film. It was not just acting. It was memory. As time passed, Fierro became something else on Martha's Vineyard. Not just a face from a famous movie, but a teacher. Through the Island Theater Workshop, she mentored more than 1,000 children over decades, shaping young performers who grew up carrying her lessons with them. To them, she was not the grieving mother from a shark movie. She was the woman who pushed them to stand taller, speak louder, and take risks on stage. Later in life, she was moved away from the vineyard she loved. In 2017, family arranged for her to relocate to Ohio so they could be closer. According to those around her, she did not want to leave. The unfamiliar surroundings and isolation worsened her dementia. She missed the island deeply, and some say she even began calling it Shark Island, as if the film had followed her into real life. She repeatedly said, "My boy is dead," not as a performance, but as a looping expression of grief and dislocation. In April 2020, during the first terrifying wave of the pandemic, Fierro was 91 and living in an assisted care facility in Ohio. COVID-19 swept through quickly. Reports say she coded 3 times in less than 48 hours. She was placed on a ventilator, but her condition continued to decline. She died on April 5, 2020. People in the Vineyard community described her final days as lonely and confusing, made even harder by dementia and the isolation of that moment in history. But love still found her. When word spread that she was ill, hundreds of former students and families recorded video messages. They were compiled and sent to Ohio. Near the end, she watched them and cried, reminded that she had mattered to an entire generation. After her death, her family donated the iconic Kintner dress to a museum. She left behind 5 children, 7 grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren, and more than 1,000 theater kids who still hear her voice when they step on stage. And then there is the scream that opens Jaws, the sound that sets the tone before anything appears in the water. Susan Backlany gave that scream. The reality behind it was brutal. For 3 days, she was dragged underwater by 2 teams of crew members pulling ropes attached to her harness from opposite directions, trying to simulate violent thrashing. She was never warned when the pulls would come. Her screams were not carefully performed. They were genuine. She later said she was yanked more than 20 times in a single day, bruising her ribs and battering her body. Spielberg would later acknowledge how dangerous the stunt was, how much the effect depended on timing that could easily go wrong. Even rehearsals carried risk. The mechanical shark, nicknamed Bruce, was notoriously unreliable, and small mishaps could escalate fast. Backlany had the water skills to survive it. Before the film, she had worked as an animal handler and a professional mermaid performer. Even so, close calls leave marks. Some of her scars remained visible for the rest of her life. She spoke openly about avoiding the ocean afterward, because the feeling of being pulled by something unseen never fully left her. Then, on May 11, 2024, Susan Backlany died in her home in California. She was 77. Reports say it was a sudden heart attack with no warning signs. The next day, after repeated phone calls went unanswered, her daughter Dina found her. It was a quiet ending, almost unsettlingly so when set against the scream that made her unforgettable. In Jaws, the water takes her without warning. In real life, the moment came the same way. No signal. No buildup. Just absence. Chris Rebello grew up as a familiar face on Martha's Vineyard, the boy audiences knew as Michael Brody. After Jaws, he stepped away from acting and chose something steadier, more grounded. He stayed on the island. He became an EMT and a firefighter. When alarms sounded and people needed help, he was the one showing up. Fame had brushed past him early in life, but he didn't follow it. On November 30th, 2000, at 37 years old, Chris went deer hunting with lifelong friends near Oak Bluffs. It was an ordinary day. Cold air, quiet woods, the rhythm of boots over fallen leaves. Then, without warning, he grabbed his chest and collapsed. His friends rushed to him, dropped their gear, and began CPR right there in the forest. For nearly 20 minutes, they worked on him until medics arrived by helicopter. Everything possible was done. Still, Chris was pronounced dead at the scene. Doctors called it a massive heart attack. The shock spread quickly. There had been no warning signs. No family history pointing toward heart disease. The youngest of the main Jaws cast was suddenly gone, and the loss rippled through the island, through his fellow firefighters, and through fans who still remembered his childhood face on screen. Only later did the deeper truth emerge. The autopsy revealed that Chris had been living with a rare congenital heart defect, something present since birth, invisible in routine exams, quietly waiting. People began to look back at his time on Jaws differently. During scenes like the canoe flip, he had been asked to hold his breath, endure stress, and repeat physically demanding takes. All of it done with a young heart carrying a flaw no one knew was there. Some experts later suggested that the strain might have pressed against that weakness, though it would remain hidden for decades. His story became a reminder that serious medical risks can exist without warning, even in young, athletic people, and it pushed more conversations about heart screenings for children and physically active adults. That same night, the island faced a strange contradiction. Just hours after Chris collapsed in the woods, the Martha's Vineyard High School football team, where he served as an assistant coach, took the field for the state Super Bowl. The players were devastated. They chose to play anyway for him. They wore patches reading "Rippy Mike Brody," merging the coach they loved with the boy they had grown up watching on screen. The stands filled with people who were not just there for football. They were there to grieve together. The high school closed the following day, so students and staff could attend his memorial service at Sacred Heart Parish. That game and that shared mourning sealed Chris Rebello's legacy on the island, not as a former child actor, but as a mentor, an athlete, and a quiet local hero who never left home. That choice had always been deliberate. After Jaws, Chris turned his back on Hollywood. He preferred a small trailer, a close-knit group of friends, his work as a firefighter, and the kids he coached. Fame had come early, then moved on. He didn't chase it. When his family later went through his trailer, they found Jaws posters still on the walls, silent proof that the film had never fully left his life. And they found a final note that stopped everyone who read it. "Shark got me after all." The line felt dark, unsettling, and eerily fitting. It tied his childhood role to his sudden death and showed that the film still lived somewhere inside him. His life traced a full circle. Born on August 8, 1963, in Oak Bluffs, the very town where Jaws was filmed. He lived his entire life on Martha's Vineyard. He died there on November 30, 2000, at just 37. He became the youngest main cast member of Jaws to pass away. For the island, his story felt complete and painful at the same time, a closed loop woven into their history. Another boy from the Jaws universe carried a different kind of shadow. Mark Gilpin, who played Sean Brody in Jaws 2 in 1978, stepped away from child stardom and tried to build a normal adult life. Decades later, his story took a devastating turn. In 2022, at 56 years old, he was diagnosed with glioblastoma, one of the most aggressive brain cancers known. The news hit his family hard, especially because serious neurological illnesses had already touched other relatives. Whispers of a curse began to circulate. The diagnosis followed a series of seizures that began while Mark was helping plan a reunion event connected to Frasier, the show that had made his sister, Perry Gilpin, famous. Scans revealed 2 tumors. One sat deep in the center of his brain, unreachable by surgery. Even with chemotherapy, the cancer moved fast. Within weeks, the tumor swelled to the size of a golf ball. And the tragedy did not exist in isolation. His sister April had died in 2017. Another sister, Patty, passed away in 2020 after her own health struggles. Each loss layered onto the last, reinforcing the sense that something dark kept circling the family's story, unrelenting and impossible to outrun. The medical crisis layered on top of struggles Mark Gilpin had carried for decades. After his early years as a child actor, he faced waves of financial and personal turbulence, bankruptcies, divorces, and the long effort to rebuild by teaching himself software engineering. For a time, he managed some stability. But by 2022, his life had shifted again. He was too sick to work, and he had lost his job. His wife, Kaki, an elementary school teacher, took leave to care for him full-time. Money ran low. Their GoFundMe campaign laid bare the reality. Unpaid medical bills, daily living expenses, a family stretched to the limit. On July 29, 2023, Mark died in Dallas, surrounded by his family. In his final moments, he turned to his brother and whispered, "Shark's back." The words struck everyone who heard them, linking the boy who had once played Shaw Brody in Jaws 2 to the man who was now leaving the world behind. After his death, Kaki shared that their sons, Spencer and Presley, had stood steadfast throughout his illness, supporting their father through each stage of treatment and decline. Those who knew Mark began to re-examine his time on Jaws 2, seeing danger and strain where they had once seen only spectacle. The famous speedboat crash sequence, thrilling to audiences, had been perilous behind the scenes. During filming, Mark suffered a concussion in the scene. Once the cameras stopped rolling, the injury was largely ignored. He continued working, and no one considered that the blow might follow him for the rest of his life. When the brain tumor emerged decades later, friends and fans speculated whether that old concussion and the stress surrounding it might have played an unseen role. There's no conclusive evidence linking the head injury to the glioblastoma, but the coincidence of timing adds a haunting edge. The tumor's rapid growth in his 50s, reaching the size of a golf ball in weeks, was a stark reminder of how silently danger can sit, only to surge without warning. Even as his health deteriorated, Mark kept creating. In the months before his death, he drew a comic that startled those who saw it. It depicted Shaw Brody in a hospital bed, surrounded by circling sharks, creatures from his childhood acting as ominous witnesses to a man confronting his end. Friends and family described the drawing as haunting, almost prophetic. It became a symbol for Mark, merging the boy from Jaws 2 with the adult facing a terminal illness. It showed how he carried the film and its emotional weight throughout his life, leaving one final piece of art for others to hold on to after he was gone. Behind these stories, there is the author who started it all. Peter Benchley wrote the 1974 novel Jaws, selling more than 20 million copies and sparking the blockbuster that would transform summer cinema. Initially, the success seemed perfect. The book was everywhere, and the film that followed became a cultural tidal wave. But over time, Benchley began to feel the weight of unforeseen consequences. Following the release of the book and film, shark populations began to decline sharply. Swimmers avoided the ocean. Fishermen killed sharks in large numbers, convinced they were removing mindless killers from the seas. Benchley watched the numbers and heard the stories, realizing that his fictional predator had contributed to real-world harm. In later interviews, he admitted that had he known what science now teaches about shark behavior, he could never have written the book in the same way. Benchley did not stop at regret. He became a dedicated shark conservationist, diving with great whites for documentaries and speaking publicly about the need to protect the species his story had demonized. In 2002, he wrote Shark Trouble to explain the reality of sharks and to address the fear his work had unleashed. He even described his own novel as fish murder porn, a blunt acknowledgement of the damage his imagination had caused. He returned repeatedly to the ocean. After Jaws, he became a serious scuba diver, traveling worldwide to observe sharks firsthand. He collaborated with conservation groups, documenting what he saw, bearing witness to the impact humans had on marine life. But over time, his own body began to falter. Benchley developed idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, a rare lung disease that scars tissue and makes each breath a struggle. Some doctors speculated that years of diving, exposure to pollutants, and other environmental factors had taken a cumulative toll on his lungs. By the time he died in 2006, approximately 65% of his lung tissue was scarred. He spent his final days at home in Princeton, New Jersey, slowly running out of breath. His wife Wendy later described how he choked at night, fighting for every inhale. The image of him gasping in his final months sat uneasily alongside the image of sharks drawn from the water, only to suffocate, a symmetry Benchley could not ignore. His conservation work deepened that sense of painful irony. Traveling with organizations such as Wild Aid, he witnessed shark finning firsthand, piles of fins, footage of animals dumped back into the sea unable to swim or breathe properly. The trips weighed heavily on him. While he raised his voice for the ocean and urged others to see sharks as vital creatures rather than monsters, his own lungs were failing, a slow echo of the very lives he fought to protect. His nightly struggle to breathe seemed almost to echo the suffering of the animals he had spent so many years trying to defend. In those final years, Peter Benchley repeated over and over that Jaws was entirely fictional, and that real sharks were not the relentless man-eaters the world had come to fear. As he lay dying in February 2006, Wendy Benchley recalled a final, remarkable moment. He offered an apology, not to a person, but to the ocean itself. He said he was sorry for the damage his story had caused and expressed hope that his later conservation work might, in some small measure, balance the scales. Benchley left behind 3 children, who grew up in the long shadow of a story that had brought their father fame and fortune, but also guilt and regret. They sometimes spoke of it as a Jaws curse, not in a supernatural sense, but as the heavy awareness that a single story could shape public perception and behavior on a massive scale. Peter tried to leave something different for the next generation. His final book, Shark Life, sought to teach young readers about the true dangers of the sea and the importance of respecting marine life rather than fearing it blindly. His journey, from best-selling author to troubled conservationist, became a stark lesson in how fiction can ripple outward and how a creator can spend a lifetime attempting to repair a story that went further than anyone intended. Layered atop that legacy were whispers and rumors that only deepened the film's haunting history. Some spoke of a cancer cluster among people connected to Jaws. Roy Scheider, who played Chief Brody, later developed multiple myeloma. Murray Hamilton, who played Mayor Vaughn, battled lung cancer. Locals speculated about the way the production handled animal materials and fake blood during filming. Real shark parts were used for certain scenes, and some worried careless disposal into local waters might have left lingering toxins. No scientific evidence ever confirmed a direct link, but the coincidence of people, place, and illness added another uneasy layer to the story. Steven Spielberg, for his part, quietly found ways to honor Robert Shaw in later releases. Subtle edits lingered longer on Quint's scars. On the Wheel of the Orca, small visual nods to both character and actor. Interviews often brought him back to Quint's USS Indianapolis monologue, a scene with its own turbulent history. On the first day it was filmed, Shaw arrived drunk and struggled through the lines. Spielberg eventually stopped the cameras, walked over and hugged him, offering reassurance to save him from embarrassment. The next morning, Shaw called Spielberg to ask if he had ruined the scene. They tried again. The second take is the one that became immortalized, a testament to craft, care, and the fragility behind cinematic legend. The weight of those years lingered for Richard Dreyfuss as well. Years later, on an Irish talk show, he met Robert Shaw's granddaughter for the first time. The encounter dredged up old guilt. Dreyfuss remembered feeling powerless to support Shaw during filming and haunted by the fact that Shaw had died not long after the movie's release. He recalled Shaw's later days in rural Ireland, describing him as a kind of roadside ghost, someone passing through life just out of reach. The lingering sense of responsibility inspired Dreyfuss to create the Book of Quint, a personal tribute to both the man and the character they had brought to life. The shadows of the film did not end with the original cast. Roy Scheider's struggle with multiple myeloma began in 2004. He underwent aggressive treatment, including a stem cell transplant at Memorial Sloan Kettering in 2005 and continued care at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. He outlived the average survival time for his disease by nearly double, a feat he often called miracle. During his hospital stays, he kept a photo of Chief Brody by his bedside. The character who had faced his fear of the water and confronted the shark became a symbol of courage he drew upon in moments of pain. When Scheider died in 2008 at 75, from complications caused by a staph infection during recovery, that photo remained nearby, a silent testament to how deeply one film can embed itself into a life. Lee Fierro carried her legacy in a different way. As Mrs. Kintner, the grieving mother who slaps Brody after her son is killed, she delivered one of the most iconic bursts of raw emotion in the film. Off-screen, she dedicated more than 4 decades to teaching and mentoring young actors at the Island Theater Workshop on Martha's Vineyard. Known for her strictness, her devotion, and her insistence that students reach beyond what they thought possible, she left a profound mark on generations of performers. In 2020, she passed away at 91 from complications of COVID-19. During the pandemic, some nurses refer to her as the real Mrs. Kintner, seeing in her famous slap a symbol of grief, anger, and the universal frustrations of families facing loss. Her life and death extended the influence of the film beyond cinema, connecting it to new crises, this time centered not on sharks, but on disease, grief, and the human experience of loss.